Hello, I'm Alfred Webre, and we're here once again with Mr. Robert Stanley, who's a correspondent with America's Morning News and whose recent book has just been published, Covert Encounters in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you, Alfred.
Well, since we last spoke, we still have the mystery on the table of Barack Obama's apparent false birth certificate, although we have some information unearthed by CNN that at the time of his birth, the system in Hawaii was to send that the hospital sent the announcement of his birth directly to the newspaper. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe that is correct. As far as what CNN reported to us, that does sound logical.
So we're continuing this week with unraveling the mystery of exactly who is Barack Obama, and we are adding the layer of the Obama-Osama trauma drama, if you excuse my alliteration, with the reported death of Osama Bin Laden. And this news just came in. I'm going to read it off of the BBC, but it's also being reported by CNN. Al-Qaeda has confirmed the death of its leader, Osama bin Laden, according to a statement attributed to the group and posted on its jihadist internet forums. The statement said his blood would not be wasted and Al-Qaeda would continue to attack the U.S. and its allies. Bin Laden's death would be a curse for the U.S. and urged an uprising in Pakistan. A statement added, the militant was shot dead on Monday when U.S. commandos stormed his compound in the Pakistani town of Abbottabad. Okay, so I understand that you've been looking into this matter, Robert, and what can you tell us more about what's occurred? And I know that you and I have shared at least 7 different perspectives on Osama bin Laden over the last several days.
Well, I find it interesting, the news statement that you read from, allegedly from Al-Qaeda, because we don't really know who is Al-Qaeda anymore. We know, based on the evidence, that people within the CIA or some other intelligence agency were creating false statements or videos of attributed to bin Laden when he was still alive, or even after he was allegedly dead in December of 2001. So there's a lot of misinformation going on about the birth certificate and the assassination. And I'll tell you something else, is that the assassination, the timing of it is all very suspect, because it helped to distract people's attention away from the fraudulent PDF that had been posted on the White House website. And that same day, Chairman of the Fed Greenspan had come out and said, we're in bad straits, and the inflation is going to go up. And of course, the markets reacted. And shortly after that, they released a birth certificate, and it kind of threw people off. They didn't know which to pay attention to. But all these things are designed.
When you say Chairman Greenspan, are you talking about Chairman Ben Bernanke
I'm sorry.
of the Federal Reserve?
Yes, you're right. You're right. Thank you. I always get those guys confused. Yes, Bernanke is the current one. Greenspan was previous. They're all the same person. In other words, the Fed was officially saying we're in trouble with inflation, the money, and that causes the world market to react. Everything went up. And then after this weekend, with the announcement of the assassination of bin Laden, everything went down. So some people are speculating that it's bad for business, especially the oil business, if bin Laden is dead and Al-Qaeda is now basically decapitated. So I'm not surprised to see that somebody has created this, whether it's genuine or not. Al-Qaeda serves a purpose for the world economy.
i.e., because war, because the oil industry depends on the permanent war economy. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying, and it's really unfortunate because it's unnecessary. But obviously, the elite that control this world feel that that's the only way to conduct themselves.
Right. So basically, we're dealing with a very fragmented, I would call, opinion field as to who exactly Bin Laden was, and what the current state, you know, who exactly was killed at about I have to get that one again.
About.
Yeah, about on last weekend. There
Right.
are different views of Osama bin Laden. One version that I've seen, which is you know, very very detailed, sets out 9 different Osama bin Ladens from 2001 until now. That is 9 different times that Osama bin Laden was either killed or used as a person. So that these may be different intelligence cover stories from 2001 until now.
Well, yeah, and one of the stories that you forwarded to me, I thought was interesting. It said that Bin Laden not only had problems with his kidneys, but it might have been was clearly related to something more serious, which was they call Marfan syndrome, which I've never heard of before, but apparently that's fatal and there is no cure.
Right. So he was a very sick man, according to that information, and that's someone who would have a family and have a pistol and an AK-47 and sort of be very active, which is the picture that was presented about the raid, correct?
Well, they've had conflicting reports about who, you know, the reaction of at the compound. At first they said he was armed and resisting. Then he said he wasn't armed and only one of his wives or the women there, you know, was resisting. The whole thing is unclear at best. They are covering something up. I personally feel that the real reason they went into that facility was to get the computer records out, because it may contain evidence that leads back to the White House and the Pentagon.
Right. So that brings us back to the original role of Osama bin Laden, going back 10 years to the events of September 11th, 2001, and where many analysts agree that event was what they call a false flag operation.
Well, I know what you're saying, Alfred, and I do find it suspicious that CIA officials actually met with bin Laden in Dubai. I mean, at least that's what the reports say. They met with him 2 months before September 11th when he was on kidney dialysis in a hospital in Dubai.
Yeah, so now a lot of these, and are we certain that that's a true report, or could that be a disinformation report of the type that they put out about Howard Hughes when he was living in Las Vegas and walking around with Kleenex boxes on his feet instead of shoes?
Well, here's an old truism about where we are. The first casualty of war is always the truth.
Right.
And at this point, it's really hard to untangle the Gordian knot that the CIA and other groups have obviously put together for public consumption to leave us completely baffled as to what's really going on and why.
Well, let's kind of go back to 2001 one to see if we can follow a thread about Bin Laden and Osama Bin Laden. I noticed a couple of days ago that the family mansion of that the Bin Laden family was staying in California on September 11, 2001, and it was on CNN, I think, is now up for sale for $2 million, and you've got acreage, you've got various houses. It's really a compound, and it's in a gross state of disrepair, but it was very opulent. And if you recall, the only planes that were in the air that day after the order went out to ground all planes were the planes that went around picking up members of the Bin Laden family. Now, isn't that strange?
Very strange. The other thing is what you had mentioned last week about Wayne Marsden, isn't it his name? He, the investigator in Washington, D.C., has done a lot of work on Mr. Obama's past, and he states in there that when President Obama was a college student, that he traveled to Pakistan for a period of time and possibly had an affiliation with the CIA when he was there.
Correct. And that was also hinted to me by as a possibility by an individual, a colleague of mine, Andrew D. Bishago, who actually met Mr. Obama in 1982 when he was back in Los Angeles visiting former classmates of his at Occidental College. He, at that point, already knew that he was going to be U.S. president, i.e., he had already been probably informed by individuals within the secret CIA quantum access program that he had been pre-identified by a time travel, as had been George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush as future U.S. presidents, and he had been informed and was under Zbigniew Brzezinski at Columbia at that time, being trained. So what we're doing is trying to trace these threads. Now, we then have a report that says that the real Osama was killed in 2001, and that is by a gentleman who was high-ranking within the U.S. government. Have you seen that?
Yes, I did. I did see that report.
That was broken by, I believe, by from Prison Planet.
Right, Alex Jones.
Yeah, Alex Jones. What is your evaluation of that particular report?
Well, I only read it last night, and it sounds plausible. I mean, unless the individual quoted in there comes forward and says that it's inaccurate, then we have to take it for face value that he's telling the truth and that he is a senior or a former senior official with the Pentagon and the White House.
Right. So we have that point. So then, if that's true, we have the news reports now saying that the 12-year-old daughter of Osama bin Laden was quoted after the raid this past weekend as saying that her father was shot after he surrendered, or that he wasn't resisting. And who is that 12-year-old daughter? And who's her father? Is that a decoy, or is that the real Osama bin Laden? I mean, isn't the real daughter available for interviews so that, you can get DNA and match up DNA? And, isn't it possible to do independent investigating that would really begin to match up the U.S. story?
Well, The only problem with that, Alfred, is we don't have a body. And as you know, being a lawyer, that if you took this case to court, it would get thrown out because there is no body. There's no habeas corpus here.
No. I mean, to do DNA on the daughter, at least.
Yes, but okay, but how would you collect DNA from Bin Laden, wherever he may be? At this point, we don't. Only the government thinks that they have samples.
Sure, gotcha. So again, it's kind of this Alice in Wonderland area, which is a trademark of the intelligence agencies. It's legend piled upon legend piled upon legend. And the fact that the Bin Laden family was evacuated, was the only plane in the air and was evacuated from the U.S., suggests that there was a high-level intelligence plan as part of the false flag operation to set Bin Laden up as the Lee Harvey Oswald of this operation, as the patsy, to set the real Bin Laden or whoever, or some Bin Laden up, some Osama Bin Laden up as the Lee Harvey Oswald of this operation, because otherwise they wouldn't have gone to that lengths to get this one Saudi Arabian family out of the country.
Right. Well, and officially Bin Laden is now dead, but the timing of it was such that they needed to they claim they've been planning this for 7 months, so that they could have done it at any time. They chose this particular past weekend because it was necessary to do so. This is called social engineering. The Masons call this order ab chaos, means order from chaos. So it's all very purposeful, very intentional, and it's all very misleading by design.
Now, I've also seen arguments that it was done on May 1st, which is, well, Purgus. I think it's an occult day which demands blood sacrifice. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, it is. And unfortunately, that is a big part of, as I mentioned in my new book, sorry for the shameless plug here, the new book is Covert Encounters in Washington, D.C. And in the conclusion, I make it quite clear that the satanic or Luciferian element in Washington, D.C. is very prevalent within the government and also is openly welcomed within the U.S. military. They have an open door policy for anybody who's a Satanist and or worshiping Lucifer. So blood sacrifice, human sacrifice, yes. Whether it's real or pretend is still part of a ritual that feeds. Now, if you saw all these people, millions of people celebrating, I understand their emotion, but what they don't understand is that energy, that biomagnetic energy, is actually being transferred into the circuit system of Washington, D.C., and then manipulated to, further manipulate the world. It's in Star Wars, it's just called the dark side. They call it the Force. I know we're talking science fiction when I say that, but there is a factual side to all of this that they don't want people to be aware of.
Now, let's since this is ExopoliticsTV, let's start going down on the multi-dimensional side to see whether we can parse out some of this, some of these various layers of disinformation around Osama bin Laden and around some of the areas that seem to be very powerful. I came across some material which was forwarded to me, and granted, this is dimensional information, and I'm just going to read the exchange. This is what is the source of this prediction about the false birth certificate? This seems to be very prescient. This is the person who had written to me about a prediction that a false birth certificate would be produced around Obama to kind of muddy the waters around him and to discredit him. And the precise prediction is in the following language, quote, "That which I speak of is the delivery of a false birth certificate for you, Obama of the United States. It is quite clear that any group member chosen to be president has great power and ability at his or her disposal and amongst their team. Compare the delivery of a false birth certificate to the typical story of a boxer throwing a fight so as to lose on purpose, although in this case it was unknown to Barack Obama that an obvious fake would be provided." Now, this is dimensionally derived information, what they call channeled. But it was written to me, and, you know, there's a link provided, and it's up on the internet. But it was so striking in terms of the research and the interview that you and I did a week ago on the false birth certificate, where we've been puzzling about the fact that on the one hand, some of the information from the Hawaii state officials as to the automatic system of birth reporting appears to confirm his birth in Hawaii, and yet there's an obvious false birth certificate that was provided by the White House on his website. And how does that happen? And all of a sudden I get this statement that has been up on the internet for some time. And this is from the point of view that Barack Obama is actually, quote, and this is where we go exopolitical, but that Barack Obama is actually, quote, a starseed. And he's kind of planted right in the middle of the darkness, and his job is to survive and kind of, you know, he's just started, but he's surrounded by and not fully in control. And here we have an instance where they say, oh, they're going to throw out a false birth certificate, and you and I, in fact, found that. Or not didn't find it, but, you know, yes, got up there and said, yeah, look at this. What do you think about that?
I agree to a certain extent that Barack Obama could be a plant, that he could be an extraterrestrial good guy put in the middle of the darkness in Washington, D.C. You may have heard Senator McCain recently has been quoted saying that he does the Lord's work in Satan's city. And he's not laughing about that. He's talking about a real thing. Now, you and I talked off the record that my personal belief is that Satan or Lucifer or demons are all other names for highly manipulative, negative, malevolent extraterrestrials that have been here for a very long time, and that they control the power structure of this world. But I also know, as I reported in my first book, that shameless plug, Close Encounters on Capitol Hill, that there are also good ETs, many of them are human, that have come here and infiltrated covertly to assist us to break the spell or the bond, the chains, the bondage that the bad guys have had on us for thousands of years. Now,
you've written a book that had just come out, Covert Encounters in Washington, D.C., and you have studied this matter for some time, and you have broken stories about the U.S. Capitol Police making extraterrestrial disclosures and leaking that information in a form of informal disclosure. What are some of the evidences or some of the facts or the insights that you've run across that have led you to look at this kind of interdimensional demon possession type reality around Washington, D.C.?
Well, I think most people are familiar with it. When you look at the layout of the city from above, there are certain geometric symbols that everybody recognizes as being satanic. But what they don't see more fully is how it's being used like a circuit board that to channel energy from beings both living and dead for the dark side. And what a lot of people have never heard, which I actually found quite interesting, was that the U.S. Capitol is allegedly haunted, and that there are a lot of strange things in there, which I document in the book, that I don't think have anything to do with ghosts. I believe they have to do with these aliens that were allegedly stored, the little gray aliens, the dead ones that were stored underneath the Capitol back in the 1930s up until an undisclosed time when they were obviously removed, but they were stored in the sub-basement of the building along with some of the wreckage of the UFO. And
this is excuse me, that's so remarkable. I've never heard that before.
I know. Well, because
could you tell us about that particular event?
Okay, the Reverend Turner Holt was the cousin of Cordell Hull, who was the Secretary of State under Roosevelt, I believe. But he'd been working he worked at the Capitol for many years and within Washington government. In the 1930s, at some point, he took his cousin, the Reverend Holt, down into the sub-basement of the Capitol after he swore him to secrecy and showed him these 3 or 4 what we would now call gray aliens that were in a glass container in a liquid, probably formaldehyde. And there was also the wreckage of a craft of some kind. It was obviously metallic. And Cordell Hull told his cousin, he says, that we can't talk about this because whoever they are, feel that the public would panic if this ever got out. Now, that predates Roswell considerably. The letter about this was written in 1999 to a UFO research group on the East Coast, but it was not made public until 2002, the same year that Mr. Allen took pictures of authentic film negatives of UFOs swarming on the Capitol, even landing on the Capitol roof for a period of time. That was also the same year that they began underground construction at the Capitol to build what is now called the Capitol Visitor Center. It's 3/4 of the size of the original Capitol, but it's all underground. Ostensibly, it's just for visitors so that they don't have to wait outside and go to get into a tour of the Capitol proper. But as my source at the Capitol told me, on at least one occasion, the people waiting outside encountered a UFO over the Capitol, and one of the individuals had a video camera and took video of it. Now, that video has never surfaced, so I'm assuming it was confiscated. So I think there's many different reasons why they spent, $600 million over 8 years or whatever to get this underground facility built. That was a perfect way to get whatever was under the Capitol that I just described out of there covertly. And it also keeps the public from loitering outside and because everybody has a video camera on their cell phones nowadays. So it prevents people from capturing events that they may not want to be publicized at the Capitol, because it is a hotspot. I mean, look, in the last 6 years, in this new book that I've written, Covert Encounters in Washington, D.C., I've documented over 900 eyewitness accounts of UFOs entering the airspace and or landing in Washington, D.C. proper. So most of that occurred in the past 60 years. Or I should say the reports were, most of the reports are, in the last 60 years. And I think that's mainly because people didn't know who to report it to. They didn't talk about it as much until the 1940s. And it wasn't really an issue. But of course, as things progressed, especially in the 50s, there was I think 1952, there was over 80 different events. And only 3 of those were reported by the mainstream media.
Now, just a technical question. For those who might not know, could you describe who Mr. Cordell Hull was? Well,
yes, he was the Secretary of State I think at the very end there it was Roosevelt.
Yeah.
And he was also the architect, and to a great degree, of the United Nations. And at least as far as the American side of it was concerned, he was very influential. He had people around him in the Council of Foreign Relations, and they were the ones that helped institute what is now the United Nations. So, but he also seemed to know a lot about the UFOs, and I'm sure not everybody had access to the sub basement of the Capitol. I'm sure that room was locked, and very few people knew that secret. Just like today, there's very few people that have access to that, those artifacts, the aliens themselves or their wreckage or whatever. It's all very, very classified and covert.
Now, what do you think is the relationship between the architectural layout, as you say, kind of the control panel, which was designed by the Freemasons,
Right.
and these large amount of UFOs, which Will Allen, who has also, like yourself, participated on Exopolitics TV.
I should point. Go ahead.
Yeah, and has been and was an engineer on an employee of 3 White House administrations. So he's a person with a great deal of inside knowledge of how the system works. What's the connection between the Washington, D.C. architecture, the large amount of UFOs, which appear to be gray ET related, according to Mr. Allen? You may have a different point of view, and the kind of interdimensional dark side that is going on in Washington, D.C. now, which has led to all of the permanent war economy that we're stuck in.
Yeah, the little gray aliens apparently are clones that someone created. Again, I'll refer back to Star Wars. You know, the Emperor, he was first a senator, right. And he had helped create this clone army. I think that what most people refer to in Sumeria as the Anunnaki, whoever they are, probably right. Humans, created these little drones as part of their workforce to kind of keep an eye on what's going on here and manipulate things behind the scenes for them. Right. But I don't think that's the only group that's going to Washington, D.C. In fact, there probably are at least one alien underground base in D.C. or the D.C. area. We know that there are extensive secret tunnels that run out in every direction from Washington, D.C. to at least, if not more than 90 underground facilities or cities in the D.C. area. And there's also evidence that there was even an ancient tunnel system and or facility under DC, what is now DC, prior to DC even being built. That's all in my book. But what are they doing there is unfortunately the bad guys are using the geometry as designed with an alignment to the stars, which I think has been pretty well established, to channel certain energies in a way that will, it's mass mind control. I know some people call it mass hypnosis. I go one step further. I have to call it mass mind control, or control of the masses using these subtle frequencies. I think the correct term is entrainment, right? Where brainwave frequencies can actually be run parallel. And the whole concept of telepathy, I know a lot of people dismiss it, but I know it's real. And these other life forms, these extraterrestrials, are very good at it. Both the good and the bad guys are far more advanced at it than the average human. But that's done by design also. I mean, we can learn it. People do learn it. I've met people that are very good at it. I've had some experience with it myself. I know it's real. So we're being blocked at many levels, physically, spiritually, mentally. We're being blocked from evolving because we actually are, as Charles Fort said many years ago, we're someone's property. I do believe that we're part of a larger empire that is being controlled by the dark side, and they are preventing us from having contact with the rest of our extended family, who are the Federation, the good guys, whatever you want to call it, So I think Alex Jones is right to some degree. I don't agree with everything he said, but this is a prison planet, but it's part of an empire, and we do serve a purpose.
Right, right. And just to pick up a thread, the Anunnaki, one version is that they are a race from this planet X, which comes into our zone every 3,600 years, which is next scheduled to come in at 3,600 AD.
Right.
But that they are the race which disconnected 10 of our 12-strand DNA, so that in order to make us the consciousness slaves, and that they manipulate the controllers or the elite here on Earth, which are the banking, the military, the political elites that control us. So
Right.
This is completely consistent with what you're saying, and so what you've been able to do then is to piece together kind of the interface between the extraterrestrials and their ground game in Washington, D.C., which is running the permanent war economy and the world psyops. Osama Bin Laden being part of the world psyops. Is that more or less what you're saying, or part of what you're saying?
Yes, and we should step back just a minute. The reason I even got involved in this investigation was due to the pictures that Mr. Allen took, July 16th, 2002. Nobody was taking him seriously, even though he worked for ABC News for 14 years at the White House and the Capitol. Nothing really happened until I received those pictures. They were forwarded to me by a retired CIA operative, and he asked me what was my opinion. So that's how I got in touch with Mr. Allen. And after looking at his pictures, and then he agreed to have them authenticated by an independent film lab, then I realized there was a story there that needed to be pursued. And that's how 6 years later, and 2 books later, we're still talking about it. And also all the video and movies and still photographs I've been able to collect over the past 6 years are on my website at unicusmagazine.com. If you look at that and you'll say, my God, how come we haven't seen this? Well, that's only the tip of the iceberg. The military confiscated most of everything the movie footage that people were taking and photographs from 1952 that showed the UFOs, some of the UFOs, when we sent up our military in 1952, they actually either disintegrated or they used a tractor beam to take some of our military jets and pilots out, completely out, and they never returned. Now, the other thing that Mr. Allen, what was fascinating, 50 years later in 2002, not only were they swarming over the Capitol, but he accidentally captured images of these objects entering a wormhole that was created by the UFOs. That explains a lot, because not only do they have a base there, but they have a gateway where they can go back and forth. And what may be even more disturbing is that they could actually time travel. Now, I know you've mentioned this before, and I can't really, obviously you and I cannot verify this, but it's something that Colonel Corso had alluded to before he died. He really felt that if you can control gravity, if you can warp space, you probably can warp time. And if that's the case, then we're really at a very, very severe disadvantage dealing with these entities.
Now, let me just to segue back to Barack Obama for a second, and what we've been dealing with the false birth certificate and trying to understand that puzzle, and then trying to understand the Osama puzzle. Here is another dimensional statement on Mr. Obama. He says, you know that it says, you folks, the folks you call pundits, speculate whether voters will give Obama a second term in office. We sing his praises, i.e., this is from the dimensional point of view, for staying the course day after day. He has to deal with some of the very ones who threaten his life and his family's. Yet his intention to keep working for a peaceful world without poverty anywhere remains firm. You know that he and his family are protected by the Christed light grid around them. That's kind of a reference, you know, the light and the dark. But Obama doesn't know that. You know that he is a major part of the Golden Age master plan, but he doesn't know that either. He acts on his convictions, principles, aspirations, and innate experience as an honored leader in a highly evolved civilization who agreed to serve Earth in the most demanding position on the planet. If everyone could know this soul as we do, all the doubts and carping about him would come to a screeching halt, and you would thank God for this man's courage, wisdom, spiritual and moral integrity, and his willingness to persevere. Now, that's not a political advertisement. I'm just reading from, again, statements from dimensional sources, and I happen to know this particular dimensional source. It's Susie Ward, and that's her supposed son, Matthew, who was killed at age 16, who's coming in from the position of what they call, quote, an ascended master. Now, does this begin to shed some light on what we were puzzling about last week about how could this forged birth certificate have gotten into the middle of things when it looks like they had a kind of a fairly tight system in Hawaii? From what CNN said, they would send the notice straight from the hospital to the newspaper about births. And
let's clarify that real quick. The birth certificate in Hawaii is not, I don't think that is what we saw on the White House website.
Yeah.
Somebody took a birth certificate, whether it's the original one or not, they cut it into many pieces, they overlaid it on top of a security background, and it's a hack job. I mean, when you disassemble the layers, it was done so that intentionally, apparently, so that somebody could look at this and say, wow, this is a bad fake. And like you said, it casts aspersions on Mr. Obama's birth. So, and also to confuse people even further, because clearly this is how the dark side works. They want to manipulate and very much confuse people and even polarize us. They want us to be at each other's throat because there's strength in numbers. United we stand, divided we fall. Right. And that's really what the dark side wants us to do: is constantly be divided rather than united.
Right. So, but the fact that if we begin to reframe Mr. Obama as a starseed who's yet unconscious,
right,
and who's acting out this role inside what you have said is a very dark system, and you've begun to give some of the layers of this in terms of a kind of a Star Wars framework. On the one hand, you've got the Anunnaki, you've got different factions coming in, and you have a worldwide permanent war economy going. This sort of puts the whole birther field as maybe a red herring that was created a long time ago to try and derail this, as they say, this golden age plan. It puts things in an entirely different frame.
Yeah, it could very well be. I mean, if you study what Billy Myers and his contact notes say, that the Pleiadians actually started in this system of Lyra, and they were extremely brutal warriors, and that that's why certain of them broke away to live a peaceful life in time traveling into the Pleiadian star system. But we are all related, and they even in Billy's notes he talks about the Giza intelligence, who are Pleiadians who have come to this earth to continue the brutal warfare, the barbaric warfare that our ancestors, have in their DNA. But I got to go tell you something else that I mentioned in my first book. I have a very, very good interview with Commander Command Sergeant Major Robert Dean.
Right.
I got to know him over a period of years, and I interviewed him many times. And there's the second chapter of my first book is all about Bob Dean, and what he saw at NATO back in the early '60s was a cosmic top secret document. It was an assessment of the threat that extraterrestrials may or may not present to the human governments. And they said in that document, according to Mr. Dean, that there were 4 different groups that they knew were here on a regular basis, and that was the reptilian humanoid, the tall, bald-headed, like a taller version of the gray, obviously not a clone, more of a humanoid, but different. I mean, they couldn't just walk down the street unless they had put on a disguise. Then there was the small grays, the clone, and that are clones, and then there were humans. As far as from all outward appearances, they were human. Right. And that was the group that bothered NATO the most. They felt, at least according to Mr. Dean, what they said in the report was that there was no immediate threat from these individuals. However, of all 4 groups, that was the one that really concerned them the most because, as he said, they could be in the Pentagon or the White House, and we would never know.
So, fast forwarding back to Washington and this kind of drama that we're in now, immediately from the Osama event, which we still don't know whether that was the real Mr. Osama, whoever that Osama Bin Laden was.
Right.
Maybe, I mean, he's become like the eternal patsy on which to build a 10-year or even more. My understanding is that in Arabic, I've heard different versions. Al-Qaeda means either the base or the toilet. So, to have, it doesn't make any sense to have a jihadist group called the toilet. It's just, this whole thing is a false war. But it appears like it's that duality which is created by, again, the dark side. Right. That creates 9/11 as an inside job to create, and they create the Al-Qaeda and they create the Osama bin Laden. And now Mr. Obama goes back to the World Trade Center and to the 9/11, but doesn't take the opportunity to say, you know something, we should reopen this because there are a lot of facts which don't make sense. And here's a list of 1,000 facts that don't make sense.
Well,
Instead,
Alfred, before we go into that list, we go into the list, I want to ask you, are you aware that the disclosure was set to occur prior to 9/11? It was set to occur not only from events in Washington, D.C., but allegedly from a very large ship that was here on the dark side of the moon that was establishing diplomatic contact and was ready to do the first official contact in 2001.
Are those the verdants that you're referring to?
Yes. I interviewed Mr. Kraft at length. Kraft at length in my first book, Close Encounters on Capitol Hill. He was very forthcoming. I'm not sure that you could ever prove that. However, when I told him, I said, "Were you aware that there was a disclosure movement going on in Washington, D.C. at the same time that you allege was that the verdants were here and trying to establish diplomatic communications?" And he said no, he hadn't, but he wasn't surprised. It dovetailed. It was logical to him.
Right. No, so that the whole disclosure movement was there. I can recall because I'm a Disclosure Project witness. And
right, from the Carter administration, I recall. Now, You've also interviewed our friend Jerry Wills, who claims that he was brought here from the 50s. Now, Jerry reminded me just yesterday that his contacts, which were happening about every 10 years after a certain point,
right,
stopped. It was supposed to happen on his birthday, which is September 11th. Okay, I mean his Earth birthday, which is not the real one. It's the one that they gave him on the fake birth certificate. He really has a fake birth certificate. that was established by the military and the Masons for him when he was brought here as part of an exchange program with the good guys. So, but he said
they gave him September 11th as his birthday. Now, isn't September 11th, or maybe it's September 2011, the close passage date of Comet Elenin that some people say is actually a dwarf?
Dwarf brown star, yes. It's causing all kinds of havoc. Yeah, I just had that discussion with Jerry yesterday about that, and it wasn't on my radar, but it sure is now. It's very disconcerting. I mean, I don't know what we're going to do about it, other than, all these events, for every crisis, there's an opportunity to grow. And you remember the movie Starman? It was a long time ago, but my favorite line in that, just before the extraterrestrial left us, he says, "You know what I like about you humans?" He says, "You're at your best when things are at their worst." So hopefully we're going to get an opportunity to be at our best.
Well, I think that was I've read that's a remark that our extraterrestrial guardians say about the human race.
Yeah, and it appears to be true. This is a boot camp of some sort for souls to evolve in a very rapid pace, because nirvana is wonderful, but I think at some point it becomes the state of equilibrium, and there's no opportunity for growth. And I really believe that's one of the reasons that this planet is structured the way it is, with the extreme dichotomy between good and evil.
That very well may be. And to segue back to the issue of, we have this ongoing series of kind of high visibility events in the PSYOPs department, starting with the release of Barack Obama's, quote, forged birth certificate, leading then to the questionable event of the assassination of, as yet, an undetermined Osama Bin Laden. Was it the real Osama Bin Laden or a decoy? We have the statement of Al-Qaeda says, yes, it was Osama Bin Laden, but as you pointed out, Osama Bin Laden is a creation of, Al-Qaeda and Osama Bin Laden are both creations of the CIA. So again, we're in this world. There are people who claim they have independent information from the inside that it was the real Osama bin Laden, whatever that means.
Okay. Yeah.
And then we have Mr. Obama going to ground zero.
Right.
Now, maybe this is wishful thinking, but the information that I have is that Mr. Obama actually knows that 9/11 is an inside job, but he has to toe the party line, because if he doesn't, he'll be killed. Is that something that makes sense to you?
Sure.
Or do you think that Obama is like Bush, just a straight, kind of party, just a straight New World Order man?
I think that all presidents have to toe the party line, or they are severely punished or put to death.
Yeah.
And that's because that's the way the dark side operates. There is no honor amongst these people, those individuals. It's all about a hierarchy, and if you do not serve the top, then you will be crushed. So it's so opposite of the human spirit that this is another reason why they have to operate in it covertly, is because if the average person was to become aware suddenly of the matrix that we live in, they would rebel, and things would get unsustainable, and it would break down. But I know a new order would emerge, that would be aligned with the light, with the Creator. I got to point out, for what I said before about we're at our best when things are at their worst. The two times in my life when I've had direct face-to-face communication with higher beings, as close as I think you can get to meeting the Creator of this universe, is because I'd seen a boy cut his face wide open and he was bleeding to death, and I intervened and helped. I just helped, okay? It wasn't me, but I intervened at the time and I helped him. And that's what led to an encounter with a being of light later, hours later. For me, because I was so disturbed by what I saw, I literally felt the boy was being manipulated or possessed. Now, I couldn't explain that at the time. This was years ago. I mean, almost 30 years ago now. But I intuitively felt or spiritually felt something was possessing the child. And it frightened me. And in a way, it was actually starting to affect me in a very deep way. So that motivated me to go up into a mountain and pray. And that night under the Milky Way, I actually was lifted up into the light and met a being who said he was my father. He glowed an incredible radiance around him, and even the center of his eyes were emanating a light. And he said to me he was my father, and I'm like, that made no sense whatsoever, because he didn't look like my father. He actually looked like Jesus. I'm not saying he was, but that's, typically you think in your mind, long hair, a robe, a beard. But he was glowing like a light bulb, and I felt absolute love from this individual. And some years later, I don't know how many it was, but I was having trouble in my life, okay? I have a very good life. I want people to understand. I feel blessed in every way. But I was a young man, and I was having issues in my 20s, and I was very ill. I had pneumonia. And I actually started feeling suicidal, and I think part of that had to do with looking into these conspiracies and trying to make sense of them. And at one point, I believe I was actually contacted by the Greys, and in a very negative manner, they basically tried to psychologically push me over the edge. And I started considering suicide. It's the only time in my life when I actually felt that way. So I ended up going to a different location, not the same mountain, but again, it was on the San Andreas Fault, very high level energy place. And I slept that night. I slept under the stars, and I met another being of light, this time a woman, and she was unusual in the garment she was wearing was not a robe. It was something a little more translucent, and she held out a crystal that I intuitively placed my hand on, and all this energy started running through my body. And immediately I was feeling much better. And she said to me, only thing I remember was, if you stay, we will do everything we can to help you. And that's really all I needed to hear. Now, I can't prove this to anybody. I just am anecdotally speaking to you in the audience, saying, I know from experience that when things are at their worst is not only when we're our best, but often when the higher beings, these more advanced higher entities, angelic, godly, whatever you want to call them, they will interject themselves. And there's plenty of examples of this. It's not just me. I'm just giving you two examples from my very prominent examples of transformational events in my life. But I know there's thousands of other people that are out there that have documented this, and other people who are probably afraid to come forward because they don't want to be labeled as insane.
Well, given that kind of process, what signs do you see from your research around Washington, D.C. that in terms of the negative dimensional presence, the light is starting to push through? Or what do you think the state of affairs is there?
I think it's very difficult for beings of light to go there and spend any time at all, because what I found in the public record is that there's a syndrome for people who go to Washington, D.C. and spend too much time in the working in the government, or it's called Beltway fever or Potomac fever. Most everybody watching this is going to be familiar with the movie The Exorcist. Okay, that's actually a real story of a 13-year-old boy in Washington, D.C. in 1949. I documented all in my second book, Covert Encounters in Washington, D.C. It's not the only case of people dealing with demonic possession in Washington, D.C., but that's the most well-documented case of what we call The Exorcist. The movie, the book, was based on this young boy who ended up going through the exorcism rituals in D.C. and then Chicago, and then back in D.C., so he had to do many times. But it was Georgetown, the Jesuits, the Catholics are the ones that intervened, and that's how I got onto the trail of the Vatican connection, the Catholic connection to the establishment of Washington, D.C. the way it is.
So the Georgetown and the Jesuits intervened to do what?
Well, the medical facility, the hospital there, Georgetown University Hospital, was where the first exorcism took place with a Catholic priest of the boy.
I see. And how was it that led you on your course of research then to the Vatican connection?
Well, they say, the old saying, all roads lead back to Rome.
Oh, right.
In this case, it is absolutely true. I have no agenda against the Catholic Church. However, they have to answer for certain deeds, for certain groups that they have created over the millennia to further their order or their empire, a global world order. Because they're not just a church; they're a secular government as well. They're a sovereign nation now, based on recognition by our government. And they do have influence. The Pope John Paul worked very closely with President Reagan by using the intelligence network that the Vatican has established over many years. They were very influential in the Cold War. But to answer your question directly, I found that the Washington, D.C. area was originally owned by wealthy Catholics. In fact, all of Maryland is originally a Catholic colony that was granted by, I think it was King Charles I, because at the time, the Catholics were not allowed to practice Mass in England. The Protestants and the others didn't want that competition or whatever. They said you can't do it. It was illegal. So the king agreed. The king agreed to give them this colony. It was carved directly out of the state of Virginia, or excuse me, the colony of Virginia had to cede some land for the Catholics so that they could have their own place and they could begin to practice their religion there openly.
Well, there's a lot of analysis that holds that, in fact, the Catholic Church really has nothing to do with Jesus, and it is the morphing of the Roman Emperor into the Pope, which occurred around 350 or so when Constantine morphed into the Pope, and the Roman Empire morphed into the Holy Roman Catholic Church. So that
not only that, Alfred, the Jove, the head of their pantheon of gods was Jove or Jupiter, and Jove literally became Jehovah.
Right.
Okay, so, and the other connection is that I've known for some time is that the Capitol at Washington, D.C. is designed, Capitol Hill and the Capitol building is a throwback to the Roman Seven Hills of Rome. They had the Capitolium, excuse me. Capitolium was the temple of Jupiter or Jove, where the senators would go and somehow get information on how to run the empire from what Jove was not Jupiter, the god, was not a planet. He was a man, or at least that's what the statues all depict him as a man.
Right.
So I would have to say he was an extraterrestrial, in my opinion. Right. And all the gods, angels, demons, good, bad, they're all, in my opinion, extraterrestrial to this world. So we have to attribute the Roman Empire, from its very basis, its religion, is extraterrestrial, exopolitical in nature.
Right.
But here's the other point. Real quickly. So if demons are extraterrestrials and the Vatican knows that they can communicate with them through these rituals or rites, isn't it interesting that the Vatican is the only global church / government that has acknowledged that extraterrestrials exist and that they want to welcome them into the church? In fact, there was in June of last year, there were 3 UFOs sighted over the Vatican. The video was taken and then broadcast on the TV later. allegedly one of those UFOs actually landed. Now, this was 4 o'clock in the morning, perfect time for covert activity. And we don't know what kind of exchanges are going on there, but clearly there's, I'll put it to you this way. I've never been to a mass until last year. And oddly enough, it was a Native American shaman where I'm living here in New England that took me, ostensibly because the Virgin Mary, you know, was going to appear. All right. And I wanted to see this if in fact it was going to happen. But what I got out of it when they did the communion, I didn't take communion because I'm not Catholic, but when they talk about communion, just like Whitley Strieber has used that word, I understood that they mean communication with otherworldly or extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional beings. That's exactly what they're talking about there.
So that we're just at about the end of this segment, but I think one of the things that we can come away from this segment is that looking at exopolitically derived information or looking at the dimensional ecology framework is really a deeper way to understand the reality. As you stated through your research, it's a deeper way to understand what's going on in Washington. Even with the case of the forged birth certificate of Barack Obama. Here came this prediction that's been online that there would be a forged birth certificate, which I hadn't, you know, who would have known?
If it was an inside job, the other, as we were talking about Jerry Wills, it's possible that the military or the Masons actually planted or created the birth certificate and caused the notification to go to the state and to the newspaper because he's not even from here. That is one very way out theory. I'm not saying it's true, but that is one possibility at this point worth considering because we don't know the truth. We're not being told the truth. That is for sure.
Right. Well, we're going to end this on this note, but one event which did come up in this segment was Comet Elenin or Brown Dwarf Elenin, which a lot of people say is too close to Ellie, which is extinction level event. So we'll perhaps in a future episode we can begin to cover that.
Okay, Alfred, thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thank you for participating with us, Robert. Where can people get your books that would be interested in them?
I suggest they go to unicusmagazine.com. It's spelled UNICUS magazine.com, and there's a book section there. There's also a lot of articles about what we've been discussing here that I post for free. And there's also my radio show that I originally produced, and also a lot of the segments that I do for America's Morning News. You can click on that link in the radio show section, and I've got a whole archive of the reports that I'm doing for the mainstream news. You know, I am the only exopolitical radio correspondent. They introduced me as the extraterrestrial correspondent for America's Morning News. And I guess we're going to stick with that because somebody has to do it.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much for being
My pleasure.
with us today, Robert.
Okay, thank you.